vote, so I can't even influence anything. But is there anything that maybe you want me to relay or convey that might be useful?
Just to clarify, you said 6-hour windows from the time we end.
No, the 6-hour window is from 3 p.m. till 9 p.m. So you have to submit it by 9 p.m.
Oh, I see.
It's a fixed. It's not like 6 hours when you download it. It's a fixed 6-hour window from 3 till 9. So I mean, and also we actually thought this. If it's some of the exams are actually 2 hours length. For a 2-hour exam, it's a 4-hour window. So the idea is the window is twice the length of the exam. I think that's about as fair as you're going to get. I really do. I don't know that you get much more fair than that. Yeah, Blake, go ahead. Oh no, Blake is gone. Did you raise your hand? Oh, there you were.
I did.
Okay.
I called on it, so I lowered it. You've discussed the time frame and like students helping other students cheat, but have they discussed at all, students cheating on their own with materials? Because you do open book, so that eliminates that possibility. My concern is those that still maintain the closed book. It's easy to have a notebook because Exemplify is not, according to what I've heard, they're not using the proctoring.
Yeah. I think the rule is going to be for a closed book exam, they're going to use exam monitoring software. It's not ideal. This is a software that it basically has a camera on throughout the entire duration of the exam. And, it's supposed to flag the system if you're making, like this, you're looking around, these sort of movements. I have no idea how accurate it is, Blake. I'll be perfectly candid. I don't think it's very accurate. I really don't. I'm being completely honest. And in fact, I think it's actually counterproductive because when people think they're being watched, they're actually more nervous and jittery. And there's cost to this. And I'll just give you an example that's not very positive. The way this software works is it matches your face, right? So you have your student ID picture, and it's supposed to match it to the, whatever's on your web camera to make sure that you are the person who's actually in front of the camera. Yeah, guess what? Consistently, black students, it says your face is too dark. We can't pick up your photograph, right? This is a known problem in a lot of tech, where the filters or whatever system you're using for the lighting for the camera, if it senses the picture is too dark, it won't recognize it. So look, I have serious misgivings about this software that are not just about, whether it stops you from cheating. I have a lot of issues on it, just completely separate from this issue. So my exam's open book. Use whatever you want. It's not going to help you. But I think the rule is going to be for a closed book exam, it's going to be mandatory to keep the cameras on. I have no faith in it at all. I really don't. And I made this point known in, whoever I talked to in the faculty. I make very candid about this point. But there's a very strong concern. Farron asks, and Alice, I'll get you in a minute. Farron asks in the chat what type of review goes on. It's opaque. I think the short answer is there. Okay, so let me take a step back. The way the software works is it's not a live stream. In other words, it's not like Zoom where it's broadcasting every single second when you're on the exam. The way that it works is it basically records the video locally. And at the end of the 3-hour window, it uploads a version of it to some cloud server, who knows where, right? And it flags suspicious movements. I think the short answer is the registrar is one who will investigate. I'll be honest. Maybe they did this last semester, but this is new, right? So I don't know what criteria they're using. I think ultimately the professor would have to assess what movement is, but how the hell am I supposed to know, right? People sneeze, right? How am I supposed to look at that video and know what to make of it? I really don't. I'm not just speaking, to you randomly. I've given this some thought. I would have no idea. I'm looking at this grid right now of, how many people are there? Like 50 people. Your eyes are all over the place. You're looking here, you're looking there. You're human. I have 8 monitors. I look everywhere, right? So I don't know. You're asking a very good question. I don't know, which is one reason why I think in this environment, I would only give a open book exam. I only give open book in general, but I think especially now, you know, it behooves you. Blake writes, the exemplified software discusses it in moderate depth. Is how this, yeah, I mean, the reason why they don't go to too much depth is like proprietary. They don't want to give away their secret sauce, right? It's like it's their tech. So anyway, this has been used throughout the country. It was used for bar exams. You know, I can only control what's in my class, and I'm doing that in my class, but I can't control for other classes. Allison, been patiently waiting.
So what is like the protocol with notes if you are sitting there? I know a lot of people who just like when they're taking a test and they don't have a physical copy of it, feel better at least writing stuff down. Like I don't know if it would be if you have a closed book,
Yep.
Is there going to be blanket rules?
Yep, I think it would flag them. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's you know, I don't know how it works with scratch paper, but I think he'll flag it as a suspicious movement. Well, let me get just the other perspective, right? I understand how prevalent cheating is. I absolutely get it. I understand it. People cheat, and my colleagues have indicated that they've heard suspicions and they have reason to believe that people will cheat. They've heard things, and I haven't, but you know, students have not the cheating students, but the non-cheating students have sort of complained that here's what they're hearing is going to happen. So you know, there are 60 or 58 of you here. I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of you had plans for cheating. I wouldn't accuse anyone, but I just wouldn't be surprised. And it's very unfair to those who take this seriously if they're competing on a curve against those who don't. So I get the impulse. So, you know, there it is. But in my mind, an open book exam makes a lot more sense in this environment. But you know, in some classes, you know, in tax or maybe it's another class, maybe open book doesn't make as much sense. So I don't know. The bar exam, I'll tell you, the Texas bar exam was done using this software, or it might not have been this, but a similar software, and it was closed book. And students had to sit there. I think I told you in some cases in their own P. You know, to make sure that they didn't, you know, get flagged for cheating. It's a weird thing. I mean, I let me take even another step back. I had the first set of review sessions this weekend. I met with, about almost 20 students this weekend, which I was basically from noon until about 5 p.m. both Saturday and Sunday, just nothing but students. You know, and I always try to get a vibe, a feel for how students are approaching it. And one common concern of students is, you know, we're now in our third semester where you are, and you're like, what the hell are our grades? We have no grades. We have, you know, 1L grades first semester. You know, our second semester was like, whatever, pass, fail, credit, no credit, didn't really count. And the third semester, you know, how are employers going to assess the grades? And one of the reasons why I think this school is being so rigorous with the software is to make sure the grades have some weight. If people know they can just cheat, they'll cheat. It's not a pleasant thought. So this is one of the reasons why they're being like this, is to ensure the grades have meaning. Someone asked in the chat, you know, are you guilty till proven innocent? I mean, it's a fair question. I don't know what the presumption is. They haven't. I'll be honest, I was paying attention. They didn't really explain the protocol of how they assess things. I suspect, you know, it's going to be very hard to prove that a glance to the left to the right is proof of cheating. If I had to guess, I think the presumption would be it was innocuous, it was harmless, but, you know, I don't know. Okay. Sorry, I don't have better answers for you. I know this is something that weighs in your mind. I can only do what is in my, you know, in my own little sphere. I can't affect what others do. But I do like to at least keep. Yeah, we talked about this for like, oh my god, almost an hour. This was not like something that like we just sort of just flew by. There's a very robust range of views on this, even on the faculty. So this is, we're doing our best we can. Let me talk a little about the midterm review sessions. I had sent you an email, and I did it basically sorted alphabetically, and I tried to, it's not perfectly alphabetical, but I tried to line up to the same number of people every day, so it wasn't too imbalanced. On both Saturday and Sunday, I started at noon, and I finished around 5 p.m., so it took me 5 hours, basically straight. Took a few breaks here and there, but it's almost 5 hours straight. So even if you are on the queue, you have to wait about 5 hours. That's just how it shook out. Not everyone showed up, which is as I expected. Maybe because you were just so confident in your midterm, you just don't even want to see the score, it's your prerogative. But I think for those who did show up, it proved to be extremely helpful. What I try to do, instead of just giving your grade straight up, is to diagnose as best as I can what you're doing wrong. If you're doing stuff right, I'm happy to tell you you did a great job. Keep it up. I have nothing to say. A few students, it was a 5-minute conversation. Like, good job. Do this again. But for most students, they're not doing something right. And it's not your fault, just you're in your third semester of law school. Your second one didn't really count. You don't have this sort of experiences that I would usually expect of a third-year law student, and as a third semester. And I'm not blaming you. That's just the way your law school career shook out. So I try to pinpoint diagnosis what might be better. So, for example, if you're not able to finish on time, that's a common one. What I tell you is use a stopwatch method where you take exactly 10 minutes per question, then you move on. And if at 10 minutes you're not done, stop mid-sentence and move on because you're never going to finish. Some students write too much. It's a problem. They have verbal diarrhea. They just dump everything on the page and they don't know what to say. They like to blame me for having a word limit, but the truth is they don't know what the answer is. Right? If you are a concise writer, it means you know what the exact answer is. You're not just stumbling for an answer. If you're going over the word limit, it's not my fault. It's yours. You're not giving me the answer. I write the question to be answered in 200 words, right? Each of the subparts. And if you can't do it, you probably missed it. You're just desperately trying to flail to get points wherever you can. The only way to know what 200 words look like is to take as many sample exams as possible. And you get to get a sense of like 4 or 5 sentences, how to jump to the point, right? I did a Supreme Court brief last week, or I guess 2 weeks ago now, that was 6,000 words. You have 1,000 words for an exam question. That's more than enough for more than enough. 6,000 words for a Supreme Court brief with footnotes. 6,000 words, right? And citations. So that's not a problem. Other common issues that people have is that they're spending far too much time giving rule statements and not nearly enough time giving analysis. So like, I'll read an answer and maybe the first 5 sentences are just copied from their outlines or just canned rule statements, just where you just recite rules and rules and rules and rules and rules, and there's no actual analysis, right? So it's maybe like 80, so think of Iraq, right? It's like 80% R rule and like 20% A analysis. And like, it should be the other way around, right? Maybe 20% rule and like 80% analysis. That's how you get the points. That's how you earn it. Focus on how the rules apply in this case. That's really where you win on the exam. You don't win by just copying stuff from your notes. One of the reasons why I give a notebook exam is I'm not rewarding you from just copying rule statements from memory. That's a lovely skill to have. I know it's very valuable, but I want the analysis. So if you just give me rules without talking about the facts, you're wrong. You should be talking about the case at the very beginning. I can't tell you how many people, there's a question about, there were 2 mortgages and there was a foreclosure sale. And part of the answer is deficiency judgment, right? I can't tell you how many papers didn't mention deficiency judgment to the last sentence. The very last sentence, right? It should be the core of your answer and not just like after you've just dumped your outline. And you'll find that if you stop giving me 8 sentences copied from your outline, the 1,000 word limit looks a lot easier, right? If you're just giving me stuff that is not, people call it a canned answer, right? Where you just have these things prepared to just copy into your exam. I know it's a canned answer because it has nothing to do with the exam, right? Every sentence you write should reflect the question given to you. It should not just be a canned answer that has no general relevance. And I give the same spiel to like, I don't know, half a dozen people yesterday. So I'm trying my best. Okay. Okay. What else? Oh yeah, cases. This was another common comment I gave to students. What separates the B papers from the A papers is discussing of the cases. There's a reason why we spend 90% of our time talking about cases, right? And it's not just cite a case. It's saying this fact pattern is similar to X v Y, or this fact pattern is distinguishable from X v Y, and here's why. That's a good answer, right? That's how you would write anything. Okay? All right. Questions? Yeah, Cassidy, go ahead.
So to be clear, if we for some reason couldn't attend our designated slot on that day, may we go on a different day and be moved to the back of the queue?
That's exactly right.
What about office hours?
If I make an exception for one, if I make an exception for all of them. The short answer is when I have 125 people, I have to have discipline for the timing. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's not ideal. If I say, yeah, sure, come to office hours, I'll have 5 people in office hours and people can actually attend for real. So Saturday, go to the back of the queue, or Sunday, go to the back of the queue. No, Nikki, you don't need to notify me. Just show up. I don't need an email. Just show up.
All right. And so if we come to office hours, don't ask you about the midterm.
God, I hate that question. Look,
Sorry.
No, I know people always ask it. I try to be respectful of everyone else's time. And it's not fair if people miss their slot for a good reason or bad reason, and then try to sidestep the process. So that's the answer.
One more question.
Yeah.
You do any of the past exams or midterms? Can we discuss those with you in office hours?
Yeah, I would prefer though if we do the actual midterm first.
Okay.
In other words, I'm happy to go over an old midterm, but I want to see how you did the actual midterm first.
All right.
And I apologize for being such a stickler. The reason why is I've done this before. And people miss their slot and say, oh yeah, I don't want to ruin my weekend. Let me just come by on a Tuesday afternoon or a Wednesday afternoon. And then I have like 10 students who all missed their slot coming by Monday at 1 p.m. And then I'm here for 5 hours when that was really designed for the weekend. Right? That's why I'm being a bit of a jerk. And I apologize for that.
I just want to make sure that I understood
Yeah.
that.
No. Your questions are perfectly reasonable. But I've done this before, and it's, it's difficult to schedule 125 people for anything. And I think what I seized upon is good. Most people are just basically sitting there studying and they left the computer in the background, and they say, hey, Cassidy, it's your time, then you come on in. Yeah. Yeah, my pleasure. No worries. You don't email me. It doesn't matter. I'm not, I'm not requiring attendance. If you don't show up ever, that's on you. I'm not going to penalize you. It doesn't matter to me if you don't, if in other words, if you're not able to do this or you don't want to do it, that's fine. I can only do so much. I thought they were effective. I had a lot of people who were doing very subtle things wrong that can be corrected. I won't say easily, but you can at least identify what they're doing wrong and tweak a little bit. Whether they actually make the improvement, that's in their hands. I can't control it. But I find within about 4 or 5 minutes, I can usually pinpoint something that's going wrong, and then that's, oh man, that's a good idea. Let me try that, and then that makes me happy. That's why I'm sitting here for 10 hours on the weekend doing this, because that's not for my own sanity. Okay. What else? Okay. Let's do a question to get us thinking again about our material from last week. Let me start the software. All right, I put the link in the chat for the class notes. Now let's do question number 1. See if you guys remember from last week. A developer can build a one-family home in land that is zoned U6. Okay. Who's next? I don't see a hand. No one knows who's next? Don't make me start at the beginning of the alphabet. I will. All right, it is.
I'll go.
Chance, you actually next or just making this up? Because if you're just making it up...
No, I don't know if I'm next, but I'll go if you want to start with me.
No, well, we start at the beginning.
I know we ended right after Dylan.
Yeah, I was the last one last time.
Who was the last one? Dylan?
Me.
Dylan was.
All right, is that Marissa's next then? Marissa C?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. I had no idea. I'm here.
Okay then, thank you. All right, Marissa, what is U6?
It's one of the use districts, and it came from the case of last week, and it's basically unrestricted use, and it had a bunch of like industrial stuff, like plants for sewage disposal and stuff, and it's pretty unrestricted. So the answer to 1 would be true.
Okay, very good. Now, let me ask the follow-up, Marissa. What can you build in U1?
Single family homes?
Can you build anything else?
No.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Marissa. Okay, she's exactly right. Last week we did Village of Euclid, which introduced you all to zoning. And the most basic element of zoning are what are called use districts. Use districts, which regulates how land can be used. Okay? And they're numbered in different tiers. U1 is considered the most select. In U1, you can only build a one-family home. Then you have U2. In U2, you can build a one-family home or a two-family home. And then you have U3. In U3, you can build a one-family home, a two-family home, or an apartment complex. And then U4. One-family home, two-family home, apartments, or shops and stores. Right? And then you have U5, which is one-family home, two-family home, apartment, stores, and things like factories. And then U6 is where it's almost unrestricted. You can build anything you want. Right? So you might ask, Josh, why would anyone want to build a one-family house next to a sewage dump? The short answer is people probably wouldn't, right? Generally, when you have these sort of U6 zones, there's very little residential housing, especially one family, because people who can afford to have a one-family house aren't living next to a sewage dump. But in theory, at least, you could, right? So what you need to understand is these sort of concentric circles. I have them in the case summary, which I'll put a link here into the chat of how these zones work. There are also area districts where different types of construction have to take different amounts of space. The thinking is if you have a one-family house, you need space surrounding it. You need what's called frontage, which is the amount of space between the front door and the sidewalk, right? Like, you have a front yard. You don't want the house to be like an inch away from the sidewalk because you want things to be fresh and open, where kids can go play, whatever. You also need area on the side of your house. In other words, separating house to house. A townhouse, is connected, but a single family house usually is what's called separated, right? They're not attached. And the government often requires different amounts of space to keep each house quiet and peaceful. As you can imagine, the more land you have to buy, both frontage and on the side, it gets more expensive, right? The more land you buy, you pay per square foot. It's more expensive. And you might need to have a backyard, right? So you have space behind your house to block you off from the other house across the street. So all of these area districts basically create a buffer around your house and require you to have more and more space. Some of the cases today concern what happens if you don't have enough space, right? What happens if you have a very small lot and you can't build a house with enough space surrounding it, right? There's a minimum size of the house and the minimum size of the land around the house. And what happens if there's just not enough space? Well, maybe you can buy land from the neighbor next door, but if he's not selling, what are you going to do? Well, that's where variances come in, and we'll get to the variance case a little bit later today. You also have height districts, which aren't quite as important, but they prevent you from building like, a 6-story house in a neighborhood that's only 2 stories. The idea is everything should be roughly the same height. We don't have these sort of, zigzag things are really tall, really short, really tall. It creates, a prettier sight line, if you will. Okie dokie. Any questions, everyone, on Euclid? And you'll see the phrase Euclidean zoning. It was used in the casebook reading for today. I'll type it in because it's a bit of a mouthful. Euclidean zoning. That's a phrase used to refer to the type of zoning at issue in the village of Euclid. But the phrase Euclidean actually has some meaning. Euclid was a very famous Greek mathematician who wrote about geometry, and you call it Euclidean geometry. So now it's actually a very accurate description. Euclid is how you lay out land. It's geometrical Euclidean zoning. Jenny, go ahead.
You kind of just answered my question, but
Yes.
I just wanted to ask, because since most municipalities have their own kind of usage districts and zoning regulations, how important is each individual use district in that case to you?
It can be very important. Depending how rigorously the city enforces it, it can decide what you can and can't do with your land. It's really important. Did I answer your question?
More or less, yeah. Thanks.
Okay, good. Yeah, Krista, go ahead.
Would you tell us what your districts are on a test, or would you want us to have kind of these in mind?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I don't think I've ever actually spelled out U1 through U6. I think I may have just said something like this is an area zone for one family residential. So I've done that, but I don't think I've ever actually spelled out each of the U6s. The Euclid one is pretty standard. Let me answer your question this way. I wouldn't make you guess what the zoning code is. I'll either say it's the same one in Euclid, or I'll guess something like a variant of it. I think that's probably what I would do if I had to guess. I mean, there are variants, right? It's not always U1 through 6, or U1 through 12 in certain jurisdictions, right? So
and the most important thing to know is that it's the most restrictive at 1. And the least
that's exactly right. That's why I put the poll question like I did today, right? That in U6 you can build whatever you want, and in U1 it's usually a single family home. So that's right, Chris. So thank you for clarifying that point. All right, let's take a look at question number 2. Can a zoning ordinance violate the takings clause of the Fifth Amendment? Yes or no? Oh, that should be yes or no, not true or false. I apologize. So A is yes, B is no. I apologize. I'm sorry. Oh, this one's close. Okay, so that was Marissa, the last question. Cassie, twice in one class. There you go. I think you're up next.
My time to shine.
Rise and shine. Okay, Cassie, what's your answer here?
No. My answer was no.
Okay, so why'd you put no?
Because the police powers, it's a valid exercise of police powers, the zoning ordinances, so it doesn't violate the Constitution.
Okay, so your answer is a zoning ordinance can never violate the takings clause.
I was using the rule from Euclid.
Okay. Is that what Euclid held, that a zoning ordinance is always constitutional?
No, so that particular zoning ordinance was not unconstitutional.
Ah,
Valid exercise.
but might other zoning ordinances be unconstitutional?
Yes, they could be.
Do you want-
I was trying to anticipate what you were thinking with that question, so I thought that you would be referring to Euclid. So
That's not what I referred to. So you want to reconsider your answer?
Yes. It could violate the takings clause by not providing compensation.
Okay, so Cassie, here's a harder question. How do we know, in light of Euclid, if a zoning ordinance is unconstitutional?
You'd have to have they'd have to actually have a point to some provision of the zoning ordinance and show how that was injuring them in such a way that they weren't being compensated for.
But zoning never provides compensation, right? In Euclid, there's no compensation. In other words, the mark of an unconstitutional regulation is not whether it provides compensation. There's never compensation, right? So you said the one in Euclid was okay, but maybe the one in another city is not okay. How do we know whether a zoning ordinance is okay?
If it is perhaps in the application, in the way that it's applied, or that's my first answer. And my second answer would be if you can prove that you were not able to use your land and get as much value of it.
But in Euclid, they lost a huge chunk of the value of their land, and that was okay.
I don't know then.
I know. Heather, I think you're next. Heather, how are we supposed to know, Heather, if a zoning ordinance is unconstitutional? I mean, we all agree it can be, right? They're not all valid automatically. How are we supposed to know if a zoning ordinance is unconstitutional?
I think it has to do with there has to be valid reasoning for why the zoning ordinance is to promote the health, safety, and morals of the community.
So you said a valid reason. Are you suggesting that some zoning ordinances do not have valid reasons?
In certain circumstances, yes, they could just be an arbitrary.
Arbitrary. Use the magic word. What does arbitrary mean?
It's just a ordinance that's put out there for no particular rhyme or reason.
Yeah, like Forrest Gump, right? For no reason. Very good. Thank you, Heather. I think she said a very important word, which is arbitrary. And this is a very common word you'll see in constitutional law. I feel, I'm sorry, Cassie, you've gotten there. I feel like the second half of the semester is all common law, which I guess I'm better at teaching than other, maybe the first half, I don't know. But this concept of arbitrariness is very important. What Euclid said is that generally zoning ordinances will be presumptively constitutional, right? That a zoning ordinance on its face will probably be valid. But there may be situations where in specific circumstances, or as Cassidy said, as applied, right? As applied, a zoning ordinance may be void. Now, why might it be void? Well, I think Heather used the other magic word, which is arbitrary, right? If it's completely random, if it makes no sense, if the government has no explanation whatsoever why they drew the lines the way they did, right, then it may be unconstitutional. So, I can think of an example that's completely arbitrary. Let's say that you have a residential neighborhood, and they randomly put, a U6 sewage zone in the middle of a residential neighborhood, right? That makes no sense. Why would you do that, right? Why would you put a sewage zone right in the middle of a one-family house neighborhood, right? And you ask the government, why did you do this? Like, I don't know. We thought it'd be a good idea. It seems to make sense. We don't really know. Right. That might be arbitrary. But let me tell you, I'm using such an insane example because most government zoning ordinances are not arbitrary. It's going to be very rare that you actually find a zoning ordinance that's unconstitutional. Right? Indeed, the examples in the book today are used because they're the rare ones where the property owner actually wins. Usually, the government gets to do whatever it wants. Right? They get to do whatever it wants. Okay, so the answer here to number 2 is A. Right? A zoning ordinance can violate the Fifth Amendment, but it has to be arbitrary and just completely random. Chance, go ahead.
When you're talking about the Fifth Amendment, it's the zoning ordinance is the arbitrary standard, but the eminent domain that we're going to get to when we start talking about taking and just compensation. Is that correct?
Zoning and taking zoning and eminent domain are different standards, and we'll get to eminent domain in a week or so.
But okay.
Yeah, they're different standards, right? If the government's actually taking your property, there's no discussion of whether the value is being diminished or taking it, right? The only question is, do they have to? How much do they have to pay you for, right? What's just compensation?
Okay, that's what I need. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's try a short answer question, everyone. Number 3. I want you to actually define 3 terms. We'll look at questions 3, 4, 5, and 3, 4, and 5. We'll do them back to back. Because to understand the next case, you need to know these 3 terms. Okay, what is a pre-existing non-conforming use? That's a short answer. What is a pre-existing non-conforming use? Okay, another 10 seconds. All right, I just called on Heather. I think Allison, you're next. Allison, what's your answer here?
I put that it's like a use that was compliant at one time, but now because of some new passed or amended zoning, it's now not in. Now it's non-conforming.
Okay, good. That's very good, Allison. Thank you. So let's just take a look at the words, right? So there's pre-existing non-conforming use, right? The word use is sorry, I defined it with its own word. Property law often employs the word use very often. Okay, what does use mean? It refers to how land is utilized, right? Are you building a one-family house? Are you building a skyscraper? Are you building an apartment building, right? What is a use, right? How are you using the land? All right? That's what a use is. The word use is utilized very, 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 very often, perhaps too much. Okay? Now, what is this non-conforming business, right? What does non-conforming mean? Well, before we do what non-conforming means, let's do what conforming means, right? Conforming means you're in compliance with the zoning ordinance, right? If you are following all the rules, you have a conforming use, right? You conform to the relevant regulations, right? If the regulations say one family only and you have one family house, then you're good. If it says no more than 2.5 stories and you're only 2 stories, you're conforming. Now, what happens if you are in violation of the zoning ordinance? Then you are non-conforming, right? If you don't conform to the zoning ordinances, you are non-conforming. Okay, so if you have a non-conforming use, you, for example, have a factory in a residential neighborhood. You can't do this. Okay? Now, zoning is kind of funny. Zoning works retroactively. What does that mean retroactively? Usually laws are prospective, right? We pass a law today that applies to future conduct. So, let's say we raise the speed limit. We lower the speed limit from, say, 70 to 65, right? If you were going 70 miles an hour yesterday, you're fine, right? You were in compliance with the law. But if you go 70 miles tomorrow, you're in violation of the law. Zoning laws are different. They're retroactive. Zoning laws apply to both future constructions, future land uses, and it also applies to past land uses. So does that mean that, you have to change things? Well, we'll get there in a minute. But just the concept of a prior non-conforming use means you had something in the past that was conforming, but because the law was changed, it's now non-conforming. Let me say that one more time. In the past, your land use was conforming. It conformed to zoning laws. But after something changed, it was non-conforming. Okay? So that's what the phrase prior non-conforming use or pre-existing non-conforming use, you'll see it both ways, right? Prior non-conforming use, pre-existing non-conforming use. They're the same meaning. You'll just see them different in different contexts. All right. Everyone get prior non-conforming use. All right. Let's do question 4. Another short answer. What is amortization? What is amortization? And I think Catherine is next. We'll give you another 15 seconds. Okay, Catherine. Catherine, help us out here. What is amortization?
I said that it was time given to any enterprise that had a pre-existing conforming use that would now be in conflict with the changes in the ordinance provisions.
You said pre-existing conforming use. Is that what you meant to say?
Like before, it was in compliance.
Right, but the phrase is not pre-existing conforming use. What's the phrase we use? I'm being a stickler here for a reason.
Pre-existing non-conforming.
Thank you. Okay, so start us over again. What is amortization? Just give us the rule.
I said that it was time given to any enterprise that has a pre-existing use that would now be in conflict with changes in the ordinance provision.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Catherine. Okay. Often when a zoning law is changed, the city may decide to grandfather the prior non-conforming use, which means if your use was in existence before the ordinance, you can keep it there, right? And you can pretty much keep it there forever, indefinitely, right? If you sell it to someone else, they inherit your grandfather status. But the government's not required to give a grandfathering status. They can instead use an amortization principle or an amortization clause. And what that says is, well, you're not in conformance now, but you'll need to be in conformance in a certain period of time. And if you're not in conformance by a certain date, you'll be shut down. Okay? Now, some jurisdictions have very long periods, maybe 30 years, right? Maybe 10 years, maybe 5 years, maybe a year. But jurisdictions usually have some period to bring yourself into compliance. Now, sometimes it's easy to bring yourself into compliance, right? Let's say the zoning ordinance merely says you have to have, handicap ramps installed in your property, right? Just sort of an easy example. Okay, it might be expensive, but you install the ramps and you're fine. Or maybe you have to have, certain safety fixtures installed, right? Maybe a sprinkler system or something, right? Well, that might be expensive, but you do it. You do it over time. But you have a time period to do it. Okay? But in some cases, courts have held that a very short amortization period might be confiscatory. All right, go look at question 5. Confiscatory. What does confiscatory mean? Confiscatory. Confiscatory. Sort of a weird word that I just wanted to find so the next case makes some sense. Okay. And this will be for, I think, Deanna in about 15 seconds. All right, Deanna, what is your answer? What does confiscatory mean?
I defined it as something that would result in the government taking. So in this case, if the amortization is too short, it would not give enough of a grace period to say non-conforming users to conform with it, which would eventually end up in a taking.
Okay, so when you say taking, again, so just what's a taking? You're using the right phrase, but I just want to make our terminology clear here. What's a taking?
I don't want to use confiscation, but a confiscation by the government or...
Why can't the government take property? How do we know the government can't engage in a taking? What tells us that?
The Fifth Amendment.
Does our next case involve the Fifth Amendment of the Federal Constitution?
No.
No. What does it involve?
Municipality. It's an ordinance of municipality.
But was it a challenge under the Federal Constitution?
No. No, it was a challenge under the Pennsylvania Constitution.
There we go. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dan. That's right. Okay, so a little bit of a trick question, but I think you got it. The phrase confiscatory, sounds like confiscate, right? They take your property. That's sort of the root of the word. Refers to a taking. But not all takings are based on the federal Constitution. You have Professor Rhodes for Conlaw, I think. You have Rocky. He's an expert in the Texas Constitution. If you want to know what the Texas Constitution, ask Rocky. Don't ask me. If I have a question, I ask Rocky. He'll tell you the same thing. I always ask Rocky about Texas Conlaw issues. He clerked in the Texas. He clerked for Governor Abbott in the Texas Supreme Court back in the day. He knows Texas law very well. I don't even pretend to. But every state has a constitution, and very often the state constitution provide greater protections than would the federal constitution. So perhaps there's some land use regulation that's valid under the federal constitution, but is invalid under the state constitution. Okay, that is the theme of our next case. I put the case summary on in the shared folder, which you can link to as well over here. Oops, sorry, I sent that in a private message. I really dislike Zoom because whenever a student sends me a private message, it automatically adjusts the response to send a private message, which is kind of annoying. Anyway, so that's the summary for this case. So here's what happened. You have a small town outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I used to live very close to this place. I know exactly where this is. It's right by the Pittsburgh airport, a very small town. And you have an adult bookstore that opens up. Now, bless your hearts, you may not know what an adult bookstore is. It's a place where you buy pornography. Right before the internet, this is where you bought porn. Sorry, if you don't know this, now you know. The city freaked out. Said, "Oh my God, we can't have this. It's going to corrupt our children and everything else." So within the span of a couple days, they were going to have a meeting, and then a couple weeks later, they put together a zoning ordinance. And the zoning ordinance says you cannot have a adult enterprise or adult bookstore within 500 feet of a of a church, of a school, of a park or other commercial facility. Well, let me tell you something. If you take a map, right, and you draw a 500-foot radius around any of those things, there's almost nowhere in the city that this place can exist. Maybe like an industrial park, right? A U6 maybe. Also, it can't be within 1,000 feet of a house. Let me tell you something. If you draw a 1,000-foot radius around every residential property, this is basically going to be zoned out of existence. It cannot exist. Let me just take a slight detour. Very often you read about these sex offender registries, which seem like awesome ideas till you actually look at how they're enforced. If you tell a sex offender you can't live within 1,000 feet of anything, they can't live anywhere. They're basically forced to be homeless. They often live under highway underpasses because it's the only place far from residential areas. These laws, which seem neutral, are designed to zone people out of existence. I had one case when I was clerking, also in Western Pennsylvania, where a company wanted to open up a methadone clinic. Okay, what's a methadone clinic? It's where people with opiate addictions get treatment. This was back in the mid-2000s, so this was long before the thing became popular. But the city freaked out. Said, we don't want a methadone clinic in our community. Well, guess what? There were people there with addictions. They were going to get their treatment anyway, but better they have no treatment, I suppose, right? But they didn't want this clinic to exist. So what did the city do? They design an ordinance. They say, well, you can't build a methadone clinic within 1,000 feet of a park, a school, a church, or anything else, right? Okay, so then the clinic actually found a plot of land outside of town that was nothing. There was nothing nearby within 1,000 feet. They were, okay, this is awesome, right? What did the city do? There was a little strip of grass in front of the clinic. It designated that strip of grass a park. Right? They said, this is now a city park, this little designated strip of grass. They're very smart, right? Local governments can move quick when they want to. Usually governments slow, except when they want to move quick, then they're very fast. They actually lost in court eventually, but my point is these sort of 500, 1,000-foot rules are designed to just eliminate something altogether. All right. But this case was not about the 500-foot rule. The court said that was fine. Instead, the city gave the business only 3 months, 90 days to come into compliance. Right? This was a 90-day amortization period. The court unanimously said this was unconstitutional, right? 90 days is just too short. But there's a disagreement about why. The majority basically said that the amortization periods are always going to be unconstitutional, right? Unless there's like a nuisance or some violation of a covenant, right? If you have a lawful land use, it has to be grandfathered, right? In Pennsylvania, under the state constitution, you cannot have an amortization period. You must grandfather in the prior non-conforming use. Okay. There was a concurrence by the Chief Justice who wrote that, well, 90 days is too short. Instead, I would decide if an amortization period is reasonable. What makes it reasonable? Well, he gives some factors which don't really matter, but just 90 days is too short. This is not a popular decision among land use experts, right? You may think, oh yeah, everything should be grandfathered. But advocates for zoning law say, no. If the community wants to change, it should not be stuck forever in the past, right? If the community wants to go in a different direction, they should be allowed to. Okay. Questions on the amortization case? I saw a hand pop up, then disappeared. Yeah, Nancy, go ahead.
So on the exam, you don't want us to discuss the factors that...
You're welcome to. You may not be in Pennsylvania, right? You should assume you're in Pennsylvania, right? In other jurisdictions, you need to know all 50 states, but I think you can discuss about whether a amortization period is reasonable. The Chief Justice's factors are quite relevant. Absolutely.
But only within which jurisdiction?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Doesn't matter. I think you can talk about any jurisdiction. Krista, go ahead.
So then are you saying that this is both common law and modern law?
I don't know that there's a majority rule here. I'm not willing to say it. I think you would just need to be able to discuss both the majority and the concurrence. I'm not sure. I know it might be half and half. I don't think there's a majority rule one way or the other. When you're dealing with state constitutions, right, it's a different standard because every state has a different constitution, and a court may interpret its own constitution broader. So I don't know that there is a majority rule here. I know students hate when I say that, but I think that's just my tentative take. Yeah. Whenever a court says, oh, majority rule, they're probably lying. There may not be one. They're just making it up, making their own opinion seems more relevant. So I'm usually very hesitant unless something that tells me clearly this is majority. I usually say, I don't know, there's probably not one. Courts do it differently. Nancy, go ahead.
So can you help me understand what I'm looking for, like in a final exam prompt? I guess you might tell us the Constitution of this state says something, and I have to apply it here to see it.
I think you're overthinking this.
Okay.
I think you are. I think that would be an unfair way to test you. If I say you're in Pennsylvania, you know what to do, and if I say you're not in Pennsylvania, I think you would just consider if it's reasonable. Yeah. I mean, look, that would be a very unfair question for you to give you a constitutional provision and ask you how would it turn out. I think I can't test you that way. All right. Any other questions in that case? All right. I want to talk about variances and special exceptions. Variances and special exceptions. Euclidean zoning is very rigid. It's very strict. It often creates situations where people are suffering hardships, right? Unexpected hardships. So a classic example is the law requires a certain amount of frontage, right? The space between your front door and the street, right? And due to just geography, you don't have enough space, right? Let's say you're like, you want to build a house in your lot and you're like 1 foot short, right? You don't have enough square feet in front of your house. It's a hardship. And you can't build anything, right? The land is zoned only for one-family houses, and you can't build a one-family house on that lot. Zoning law permits something called a variance. A variance allows the government to create an exception to the zoning rule on a case-by-case basis. Right? Every jurisdiction has a zoning board. And anyone can go to the zoning board and make an application for a variance. They say, look, I have some hardship, right? I cannot use my property. It's useless. I can't build my one-family house because I don't have enough frontage, right? I've tried to acquire more land, but just there's no way to do it. Can you please help me? Give me a variance and help me address this hardship. At that point, the zoning board has a lot of discretion. These people have a lot of discretion. They can say, well, okay, Josh, you've shown you have a really strong hardship, right? It's really impossible for you to build. And look, if we give you a variance, it's not going to be that big of a deal. No one's even going to notice. There's like only 1 foot difference. This is not going to screw up our zoning plan. we'll give you an exception. So we'll give you a variance. Great, right? You're happy, you're thrilled. But the zoning board could also say, yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, I know this is tough for you, but it's really important to have 50 feet of frontage. And if there's 49 feet of frontage there, it's going to look weird. And we just don't want to change it. So too damn bad. You know what? Maybe you can like pitch a tent or something, right? Go camping on your land. But you can't build a house there. I'm not making up the camping example. That comes up in the case later this semester, right? And guess what? If the government denies you a variance, the zoning board denies you a variance, you're screwed. There's very little opportunity for review. You can go to the courts, but the courts are deferential to the zoning board. In other words, if the zoning board denies you a variance, you're out of luck. Your land is basically useless. Maybe you can sell it to your neighbor, right? So he has a bigger lot, but you're probably not building your house. Again, even if it's like 1 foot short, you just need 1 more foot of land, you're not going to get it. Has anyone ever actually had to submit a petition? Anyone ever have the experience? I've not done it. You're going to lose, right? You're probably going to lose. Unless you're friendly with the people on the commission. If they're your buddies, you might get it. But it's very, very cronyistic, right? If they like you, if they don't. It's very... This is going to sound bad, but the zoning boards are not elected. They're usually appointed. And they're usually appointed by people who have a very strong opinion about how things should look, right? Someone like me who doesn't care about land use would never be appointed to a board because I don't care. Like I wouldn't put enough of my time to control how other people build their property. But the people who want to be on these boards generally do want to have that control. And that's just, they're in that job for a reason because they have a very specific vision of what the land should look like. And so these things are hard to grant. And very often, though, these proceedings are not very fair. There was a note in your case book about a video recording of one of these meetings where people are, looking at their phones and, they're reading a newspaper and they're doing paperwork. Again, this is not like an actual elected body. They're usually appointed by the mayor, by the county commissioner, whoever else the relevant authority is. They're not usually lawyers. They're not usually architects. Their training varies wildly. Alexis says some variance hearings are done by the county judge's office downtown. Yeah, the county judge is probably a little better than most, but a lot of these zoning boards are just, and I don't mean this in a disparaging way, but they're not lawyers. They're doing the best they can, but you're going to lose. Okay. Questions on variances. The case in your book, it's like a little note case, is from New Jersey. What I say about New Jersey is always sort of the opposite of what the normal rule is. In the New Jersey case, you had a guy who didn't have enough space to build on his land. A variance was denied. But the Supreme Court reversed and said, no, you have to grant the variance, that there was a very strong hardship. This is an outlier, right? Most of the time, variances are denied, and the courts are not going to intervene. The courts will defer to the elected to the appointed board. All right, any questions on variances? Variance is a little bit easier. The second item I want to discuss is called a special exception. A special exception. It might also be called a conditional use permit. Oh, Caitlin, go ahead.
I was just wondering if we need to know the difference for test purposes between area and use variance. I know that they're
Yeah. I'll mention that briefly. There are different kinds of variances, right? Let's say that you want to build, a factory in a residential area, and you say you have a hardship. You're seeking a variance about usages. That's a lot harder to grant, right? That's a lot tougher. It's like, why do you don't need to build a factory here. So use variances are like almost impossible to get. Area variances are a little bit easier to get. For example, if you need 1 more square foot of land, right? The court may be inclined, the court may say, well, it's only a foot, what's the big deal? The character of the neighborhood is saying the same. So it's easier to get a area variance than a use variance. But still, look, I'm going to be honest with you, courts are not going to second guess the zoning board. If the zoning board says no area variance, then you're not getting one. That's just how the rules go. If the zoning board says, yeah, you get a variance, okay, you're awesome, right? That's great. But the courts are not going to second guess the zoning boards. Okay, but let's go back to the second one. You have something called a special exception or a conditional use permit. CUP, conditional use permit. Special exceptions are different than variances. Students confuse them a lot. Please try to keep these differences in your notes. Okay. Variances are granted based on some sort of unexpected hardship, right? It wasn't planned, but it just happened to be that because of geography, there wasn't enough space here, right? You just didn't have enough frontage space. Special exceptions are different. With a special exception, the legislature decides in advance that there are certain circumstances that might arise again and again and again. And if those circumstances arise, you check certain boxes and you get a special exception. So, maybe an example might be that, certain businesses want to, install a drive-through, right? I'm just making something up, right? A restaurant wants to install a drive-through. So maybe to install a drive-through at a restaurant, you need to have a certain number of parking spaces. It has to be a certain width of the lane, right? Maybe you need to have, an area for a pickup, right? There's certain factors that are very easy to satisfy. If you have X number of parking spots, you have a 15-foot lane, and then you have a 5 more parking spots for a pickup, right? You get a permit to have a drive-through. Those are easy, right? The legislature decides in advance the specific requirements to get this permit. And if you meet these factors, you check all the boxes, then you get your special exception. You can build your drive-through. Okay? Right? It's actually a lot easier. The key distinction between a variance and a special exception is what's called discretion. With a variance, the board has discretion to decide, is there enough of a hardship to grant this variance, right? There's discretion. We think it's bad, but it's not that bad. It's not really necessary. But the special exception, there is no discretion. It's like a formula. Check, check, check. You have the parking spaces, you have the lane, blah, 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 right? And if you meet the criteria, you get your special exception. Because it's the legislature deciding the criteria, not the zoning board. Okay? Now, why does this matter? Well, in the second case, it's like a note case. It's very short, called Cope versus Inhabitants of the Town of Brunswick. You had a special exception that was very broad. And for example, the special exception says, that a use won't adversely affect health, safety, and welfare. Or a use will not devalue or alter the character of the neighborhood. Those are very vague standards, right? What does it mean to alter the character of the neighborhood? What does it mean to affect the health, safety, and welfare of a neighborhood, right? Zoning boards cannot make those sorts of decisions. Those are hard decisions involving public policy considerations. So the courts say that with a special exception, there cannot be discretion. It's be automatic. If you have a special exception statute that gives so much discretion, it's unconstitutional, right? The legislature cannot delegate. The legislature cannot delegate to the board this much discretion. These are not elected officials, they're appointed, and they can't make these hard decisions. So again, with variances, discretion is permissible. Is there a hardship? But with a special exception, discretion is not permissible. right? They can't decide, well, what's in the welfare of the population, right? What's the character of the neighborhood? They have very limited guidance. So again, with a variance, generally, if they find that there's no hardship, you're out of luck. But with a special exception, if the board exercises way too much discretion, the special exception statute itself may be unconstitutional. Okay. Questions on the difference between variances and special exceptions? Nothing? I don't believe you. This always gives people difficulty. All right. I'll come back to this again next class. I don't actually believe you. I think you still are unsure. I'll say one word about spot zoning. That was the subject of the third case, the Rochester case, right? It's very often the case that zoning is done to promote favored interests. So in this city, in Rochester, Minnesota, the city wanted to build homes near the Mayo Clinic, a very famous hospital. And they basically rezoned just one specific area. And some residents said, hey, this is not fair. This is what's called spot zoning. You're just zoning for one spot. Again, the courts are deferential. The courts are generally not going to second guess a zoning decision, even if it's so obviously designed to benefit one group and one group alone. Spot zoning sounds like a bad thing, but the courts generally defer. Okay. Questions on this one? Okay. I'll start the minute poll now. Let me just wrap up briefly. With the amortization periods, I think it's safe for you to always assume on an exam or otherwise that the concurrence is probably something to talk about. You should always discuss whether a period is reasonable. Even if the answer is ultimately they're always void, I think it's useful to discuss that a 3-month period is probably too short. With variances versus special exceptions, you have to keep in mind who is exercising the discretion. With variances, the discretion is by the zoning board. Is there some sort of undue hardship or really an unforeseen problem that makes it impossible for land to be used? But with the special exception, the zoning board's not exercising discretion. They have to basically be a robot and just check boxes and decide if a given land use is permissible. All right? Any questions? All right. I will see you all in class on Wednesday. Have a wonderful evening.